Okay, I'm going to walk you through the first part of assignment 10, creating an asynchronous decorator. So we're going to continue looking at our currency trader, but we're going to look at a slightly different version of this. And so you're going to have to download this from GitHub. I'm going to try to force you for this last part of the course to use GitHub more and checking in and out of software, which is common in most formal business settings when you're really programming. So you should make sure you're logged into GitHub, and then you should visit this website. You first might have to accept the project, and then you'll get to a website like this, which should have the URL for your project. It takes a couple minutes sometimes for this to get loaded. If you click on this, you should see all the code here that we have. And if we go back, so that should all be there if I click there. So that means this link is all ready to go. I'm going to copy that link and be ready to go with that. So now I'm going to start Visual Studio and make sure I don't have any projects opened up here. So make sure you're closed all your solutions. And then I'm going to go to Team, Manage Connections. Let me this up a little bit so you can see. Okay, so the Team Explorer should be showing here next to the Solution Explorer. And local Git repositories, and you might have one or two here. I have more, unfortunately, but you should see local Git repositories and hit clone and then enter the URL. That's where you're going to paste in that GitHub URL that we're going to grab the folder from, and then location, and you should be specifying a location here. Now watch out, by default it's being not stored in your documents, but CIS or whatever your user is /source.repos. So you might want to hit this button and store these in a different location, like your Visual Studio documents or something like that. But it's not in docs, it's a little different location here. So I put that in here and I hit clone, and it should copy all the files from GitHub down into your local machine, and now it'll show up on your list here. Here's my new, so I've got to double click on this, and then it'll show my solution. I have to double click on that, and if I do both of those and wait a sec, now I should be able to go to Solution Explorer. It should show all my code here. So all my code will have been downloaded from GitHub and be there. It doesn't take too long usually, but you have to make sure you do those steps. So again, let's see if I can get back here. We are here, and again, our newest one was in bold here. I double clicked on that and then double clicked on the solution to open it up, and then it should open up in your Solution Explorer. Okay, so that's what we did here. We did all that. We're going to review the asynchronous decorator in our textbook and see how that works. Okay, so I've made some changes to the currency trader here. So let's look at those. I added this GUI routine. So there's a form here that pops up, and it has a couple buttons on it. So when you run this now, it should start this. Now, for some reason, when I push this to GitHub and back, this doesn't work. So when I hit start, it seems like it complains about an error. It can't find the main program, or just, I know it runs the old text one. So what we want to do is right click on the GUI one, the currency trader GUI, and say make this set as startup project, and that'll make that bold. So now if you run this, it'll run this GUI version of it first. So again, I've broken this three-part thing into a GUI thing. We can read the trades. It reads the trade database from the internet, this web file. I've actually switched it to read in 100 trades. And then it parses the trades and quickly converts all those into trade records and displays the total one. And then it should store this to the database. Now if I click on this, it freezes the interface. I can't click on anything. Everything's frozen here while it processes the data, those 100 trades. And I can actually look over to the right here. I can't even move that window. But it is processing those trades, and I should see it scrolling some information on that update. But again, I moved to 100 trades because to show you how long it takes and why it freezes this whole interface. So basically it seems like my whole program is frozen here while I'm doing this. There. Oops. Oh, there was an error in this. Yes. Let me show you how to fix this. We don't have the connection, the database in quite the right spot. I will try to change this before you download the code, but in case it's not fixed yet, let me just show you what's going on. So I'm going out to my user sources repo. That's where this is created, and this is the newest database. And I need to move the database into Currency Trader because GUI, the Currency Trader GUI, and right now it's in Currency Trader. So if I go into Currency Trader, bin, debug, the database is there. I'm just going to copy that, excuse me, and then I'm going to go into the GUI one, bin, debug, and paste it there. Oh, it is there already. So let's see if this is going to run now. So hopefully yours will run. If not, again, if you move that trade database over here, if you delete the old trade database, if there's one already under the currency trader GUI bin debug, there should be just a trade database. So if you, hopefully I'll have this error fixed by the time you download this, but you should be able to run this, and you should be able to read the trades. It reads them in, parse the trades, it shows 100, store trades, and this will process the trades. And again, notice that while this is running, here, we'll try this again. Stored trades. For a while, this is frozen, and then after a sec, the trades get written to the database, and then things aren't frozen. But for a while, the interface is frozen, and that's why we want to move this to an asynchronous call here. So this is how we're going to do this. So the idea again is that, like, we have our main class and we're calling this concrete class, and we're going to put a decorator in between and kind of wire it up here for us to use. So in this case, let's look at our currency trader. We have our trade processor, which calls our creates a trade storage object and calls the persist method there. And so if we look, and that's actually stored in our ADO.net, currency trader ADO.net. We have our ADO trade storage method here, class here, and it's so we have ADO net trade storage, and it's got a persist method. So this is what's being called right now, and we're going to put another class in between this class and the main programs. So this implements this trade storage. So again, if you can imagine, this is the interface here is this trade storage here, and so we're going to reroute this. So what we have here is we've got, right now we have our main program using this trade storage to interface to connect up to this ADO.net or ADO.net trade storage and calling the persist method over there. And so you can kind of think of these interfaces often as like plugs that you can plug into defining interfaces, like try a charger for a cell phone or a HDMI connector. We've got this kind of cable coming this way and this kind of cable coming this way. These are both trade storage interfaces, so we can plug this class into this class. So we're going to define a new class here, this async trade storage, and we're going to reroute this one down to here and reroute this one over to here, so that the main class will use this asynchronous trade storage. That'll do asynchronous, and this will have its own persist method, and it will call this persist method in here. So let's create this new class, this async trade storage class here. So over here, and let's put that in the ADO.net or ADO.net project. So we'll create a new class there, add a new class, and we'll just call it async trade storage. And now we want that to implement the same interface. It's got to do the same plugs here so we can reconnect everything. So just like the ADO.NET implemented this trade storage, we want our new async to do the same thing. And so it's going to give us some questions about this. So make sure you want to use these contracts because that's where it's defined, and we're going to say yes, and it'll put this using contracts over here, and then it'll ask implement this interface, and we'll say yes, and it'll add in this persist method in the same way that ADO Net Trade Storage has a main persist method. But we don't want to have to recreate this. We just want to call this method here. So inside the async trade method, we're going to create our own ADO trade storage. Let me show you how. Let me look at this another way. So main class was creating an ADO.NET trade storage and calling persist there, and we're going to reroute it. We're going to have a main class create an async trade storage, and then have async create an ADO.NET trade storage, and then when we call persists, it'll work all the way. So I'm going to go look in the main class and find where it creates an ADO.NET trade storage, change it to this, and then inside here put the creation for the ADO.NET storage. See if that makes sense. So inside the GUI, we're creating these things. So if I go to my form and click on any of these buttons, it'll get me into the code, the view of this code. And I can scroll up, and when the form loads, we're creating a data provider, the trade validator, and trade processor. And here we're creating this trade storage routine. So I'm going to copy this from here. And I'm going to do that in the async trade storage. I'm going to move that here and declare a variable there for that. Now inside the form here, rather than creating an ADO net trade storage, I'm going to create an async. Oops, I didn't quite do that right. Let's say I'm going to create an async trade storage routine. Now, just like I'm going to need to create a constructor then for that. So in the ADO.NET trade things, I had this constructor. I'm going to create a similar constructor in my async trade storage. And the main thing I want to do is keep track of this logger. So I'm actually going to copy these things and put that into here also. So inside my class, for async, I want to duplicate some of this stuff in the other one. I'm going to declare a logger to keep track of it, and I'm going to declare my constructor, my async trade storage logger stuff here, and have that when I create the async one, I'm going to be given a logger and keep track of that in this local variable. Okay. Well, one thing I've been noticing is the way I have this set up right now, the namespaces aren't quite right. See how this says single responsibility ADO.NET? I've changed that to currency trader, and it's not changing it everywhere. So make sure your namespace is currency trader ADO.NET here. Okay. I'm going to now move this local variable up with my other one. Okay, so here's what my class looks like so far. Okay, so now I have my class here. Let's look and see where I'm calling that in currency. In the main form, I'm calling that, and I look at the error inaccessible due to protection level. Oh, and I always forget when I create these classes, they're not set to public by default. So make sure I set that to public. Okay, so now here we're now creating this. So we can look at our picture now. In our main class, we've created an async trade storage thing, and we're using this iTrade storage interface there, and we're also going to be using the same interface up here. And then so inside async trade storage, we're creating one of these ADO net trade storage. So let's see if that's working now. So let's in async. I'm creating one of these ADO.NET trade storage routines and setting that up here. And so that should be creating this here. Okay, my other problem is that I'm trying to instantiate this trade storage here with the logger, but I only have the logger here. I only know the logger here, not early. So I'm going to make sure that I do this new down here. So I want to initialize this variable inside my constructor here, because I won't know the logger variables and set until there. So once this constructor gets created and passed in a logger, and I keep that locally, and also pass that into the ADO.net, so that logger gets passed along. Okay, so now we've got this creates this, and this creates this. The other thing we need to do then is make sure we have persist call all the way through. So from here, when we're clicking on the button, in fact this store trades button, it's going to use our trade processor and call store trades, and trade processor store trades uses our trade storage and calls persist. And so that's going to call this again. So now that we've rerouted, it used to call this persist, and it now calls this persist, and then now this persist has to call this persist. And that's where you have to work on this code. There's this method of running persist in the background. So this is the command to run this persist in the background. So we'll put that in. So rather than declaring an exception here, we'll run this code here. Let's go back here. So we'll take this code and we'll put it in here in async storage, and we'll call persist. So let's see what problems we have. I called this one, my variable is called trade storage, not synchronous trade storage. I'll just use the trade storage here as my, so this is this variable. I'm trying to call the persist over here, and I have to make sure I use whatever variable I use to create that. So up here I created trade storage and I initialized it, and so this is my synchronous trade storage routine. I'm going to call the persist there. Now this run will run this in the background or in a separate thread. So normally when we're going through this, we just have a single thread it's stepping through. So like when I click a button, it goes into the button click routine and it processes this and this, and so it's going to store trades, excuse me, and then so it goes here and it calls trade storage persist, and it'll go here and trade storage persist will go through, and for 100 trades each one it'll commit and connect up to the database, and when it's done it'll return back. And so while it's doing this, the single thread is frozen on the interface. So what we've done is introduce this, and this task.run, it's kind of a weird syntax here. This is like an empty class definition and running this persist, but this is just how it's set up. So we're saying task.run, and then we're running this persist method in this object, passing it these variables. So what that does is sets up a new task to run this area here, and runs that and sets that all up, and then so that'll run in the background, and so we'll never get told that that's done. So this works fine, this sort of setup fine whenever we can run a routine in the background and never have to hear back from it. So in case this will work out okay. I can run this. Now I can hit read trades, parse trades, and then if I hit store trades, it'll quickly say written to the database, but it hasn't actually written it to the database. I can watch over here and it'll write to the database later on. It'll take a while before, but while that's writing to the database, this interface is all freed up and ready to go. So this runs it in a separate task. So I've kind of walked you through this one today to give you a little better idea of what we have to do to do this, and it gives you a little time to prep for the quiz too that's coming up and study for that. So hopefully this assignment is relatively easy this week. I will take a second and show you what do we have to do if we don't want to do this. If we have something we want to run in the background and we don't want to wait and have this, and we need some data back. Writing to the database is fine. We're writing to the database and it's a fire and we don't have to wait. So as mentioned in the textbook here, this asynchronous has some limitations, and it's good for these fire and forget methods, but doesn't work that well for more complicated methods where we have to run something in the background task or in a different task and get information back to that. And I'm just going to show you that real quickly, although it's kind of beyond the scope of this, what we're doing right now. But here's the same project, and we've added another asynchronous task so that when we click the main button to load the data from the internet, it does that asynchronously. So right now we read data from the internet from a file and it loads it up, and there's a delay, and with a slower internet connection this delay is longer and it freezes up this interface also. But this is not a fire and forget. This, we have to run this in the background, and then we have to get the data and bring it back here. And so it's hard to get data back from a task you start, and particularly it's hard to update. You can't have another task update your GUI or anything like that, so it gets complicated. So we've done something similar to what we did. We created we have this stream trade data provider here that goes out and gets the data from a website and reads that back. Well, actually, we changed that to a URL trade database. So rather than reading from a file, now we go out to this website using a URL and gets the data. So that was set up for us. But we've added this decorator to it. Again, asynchronous URL trade data, which again includes one of these, uses this iTrade data updater and creates an updater, and we'll go out there and get that data using this URL trade updater. So we'll still do that, but and it runs in the background. But rather than the way we did it before, we are now going to when we call get trade data, we're going to actually use some asynchronous methods within the web client, because this is so common. We're going to download this string asynchronous. There's a special method built into the web client to do asynchronous communication, so we're doing that. But that runs in another task. But before you do that, you set up a method that you want to have called when that's done. So we've defined this method here when this runs, when our asynchronous stuff is done in that separate task, a message, or this method we called back in this task telling us that we're done, and then we will process that trade data. The only problem is that then we have to get this trade data back to our main program. So we have to work through a couple hoops in order to get that. So we define another method here, a trade updater, here that will update the trade data going back the other way. So a trade updater is written and an interface is defined. And then when we create our data provider, we provide the updater. So this is the class we're going to use to send the information back to the main method. And so then we're doing that here. We're using this trade updater to send the information back. So we have to basically define another interface and another method to send the data back. So again, this goes beyond the scope of a simple decorator method. The decorator method is really quite simple. You have a basic method. So in a decorator method, you have some main class using some actual method out there through some interface, and we add a decorator to add some functionality in between those, and the decorator implements that same interface and uses that interface to call this other method. So again, you can't use that in these more complicated methods where you're trying to go out asynchronously, get data, and then get data back. Okay.